If you turn your attention inward right now and ask the simplest possible question, who is it that is hearing these words? What actually answers? Not a name, not a face, not even a thought. Just a strange, silent presence that feels obvious and impossible at the same time. You can see the world. You can feel your body. You can watch thoughts rise and fall like weather. But the one who is seeing, where is that one hiding? Why does the observer vanish the moment you try to look directly at it? This documentary begins with a quiet unease, because the mystery we're entering isn't somewhere far away in deep space or hidden inside equations. It's already here, breathing with you, listening through you, waiting behind your eyes. You have never been without it, and yet you have never seen it. Every experience you've ever had, joy, fear, love, boredom, pain, has appeared in this invisible space of awareness. But awareness itself never steps forward to introduce itself. It never says, "Here I am." It just watches. Think about it. You can observe your thoughts. You can hear your inner voice speaking, arguing, remembering, planning. If you can hear it, it cannot be you in the deepest sense. You can observe emotions too. Anxiety tightening the chest, excitement lifting the breath, sadness spreading like a heavy fog. If emotions can be noticed, they must be appearing to something. And even your body, the thing you call me most confidently, can be felt from the inside like an object in space. Pressure, warmth, tension, movement. If all of these can be seen, felt, known, then what is doing the knowing? This is where the discomfort starts, because the mind desperately wants an object, a shape, a center, a thing it can point to and say, "That's me." But when it looks, it only finds reflections, thoughts about the self, memories of the self, stories of the self. Roles, labels, identities stacked like masks in a theater backstage. Student, lover, failure, survivor, dreamer. Each one convincing, each one temporary, none of them watching. All of them watched, and the moment you try to turn awareness into an object, to capture it like a photograph, it slips away. Like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, like trying to bite your own teeth. The observer cannot observe itself in the way it observes everything else. This is not a flaw. It may be the most fundamental rule of consciousness itself. Physics hints at this limit in strange ways. In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement is never neutral. To observe a system is to disturb it, to force it into a definite state from a cloud of possibilities. The observer is always part of the experiment. There is no view from nowhere, no perfectly objective vantage point floating outside reality. And yet, in our own inner world, we keep searching for exactly that. A final, objective observer who can look at the mind without being tangled in it. But what if that search is doomed from the start? What if the observer is not a thing inside the system, but the condition that allows the system to appear at all? From the moment you wake up in the morning, awareness is already there before thought, before language, before memory fully loads. For a brief second, there is just presence, raw, undefined, quiet. Then the mind rushes in, naming, categorizing, reminding you who you are supposed to be. And just like that, the mystery is covered over by familiarity. You forget the strangeness of being here at all. But stay with it for a moment. Imagine your awareness as a dark, endless room. Every sensation, every thought, every sound appears in this room like a flicker of light. A memory glows, then fades. A plan lights up, then dissolves. A worry pulses, then drifts away. The room itself never changes. It is not bright or dark. It has no shape. It does not move. And yet without it, nothing could be seen. You have spent your entire life paying attention to the lights, never to the space they appear in. And now, as you slowly turn toward that space, something unsettling happens. The sense of being a solid, separate someone begins to soften. The boundaries blur. The familiar feeling of, "I am in here, and the world is out there," starts to feel less certain, and the mind reacts to this with fear. Because if the observer can't be found, then who are you really? This fear is ancient. It echoes through philosophy, through religion, through neuroscience. The self feels so real, so intimate, so central, and yet when examined closely, it behaves like a mirage, always present, never graspable. You chase it through introspection the way someone lost in the desert chases water on the horizon. Each step forward feels promising. Each arrival reveals only more distance. Neuroscience adds another layer to this unease. When scientists look for the self in the brain, they don't find a command center. There is no single place where you live. Instead, there are networks, distributed processes handling memory, emotion, perception, prediction. The feeling of being a unified self appears to be something the brain constructs, moment by moment, like a story told so convincingly that the listener forgets it's a story at all. Your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next, what you will see, what you will feel, what you will think. And the sense of I may simply be the brain's best guess about who is in control of this unfolding process. A useful model, a survival interface, not a witness behind the curtain, but part of the machinery itself. And yet, something remains that doesn't quite fit into this explanation. Because even if the self is a model, even if identity is a story, the fact that experience is happening at all still stands. There is still something it is like to be here. There is still awareness. The story may be fictional, but the stage is undeniably real. So what is the nature of this stage? Some traditions say awareness is like the sky, and thoughts are like clouds. Clouds change shape, collide, disappear. The sky never argues with them, never clings, never resists. It allows everything without ever being marked by what passes through it. But notice something subtle here. The sky cannot look at itself as an object in the sky. It can only be itself. This is where language starts to fail. The moment we talk about awareness, we turn it into a concept, a thing, an idea. But awareness is not an idea appearing in awareness. It is the condition that allows ideas to appear. It is closer than close, more intimate than breath. And because of that intimacy, it is almost invisible. You don't notice silence until a sound stops. You don't notice space until something moves through it. And you don't notice awareness until you question the one who is aware. Try this now, gently. Don't look for an answer in words. Just notice. Thoughts arise. You see them. Sounds arise. You hear them. Sensations arise. You feel them. Is there any effort involved in being aware of them? Or is awareness simply already there, effortlessly receiving whatever appears? And if awareness is effortless, does it belong to you? Or do you belong to it? This question quietly dismantles the usual sense of control. Because if awareness is not something you do, but something that happens, then the idea of a central doer begins to loosen. Actions still occur. Choices still appear. Life continues. But the feeling that there is a tiny manager inside your head, pulling levers, starts to feel less convincing. This can be frightening. It can feel like standing at the edge of a vast drop. The ego, the story of me, exists to provide stability, continuity, a sense of authorship. Without it, the mind worries it will dissolve into chaos. But notice this too, when you are deeply absorbed in something you love, music, art, movement, creation, the sense of me often fades. And instead of chaos, there is flow, presence, aliveness. So maybe the self was never the source of meaning, but the obstacle to it. Still, the paradox remains. The observer cannot observe itself. The eye cannot see its own seeing. The knife cannot cut itself. And yet, awareness somehow knows itself by being itself, not through reflection, but through presence, not through analysis, but through intimacy. This is not something to be solved like a puzzle. It is something to be lived like a mystery. Throughout this documentary, we will move deeper into this question, not to pin it down, but to let it open. We will explore how attention shapes identity, how memory forges a past that never quite existed, how physics mirrors this inner paradox, and how moments of awe, terror, and silence crack the mask of the self, just enough to let something vast shine through. For now, stay here, at the threshold. Feel the strangeness of being the one who is aware without knowing who that one is. Let the question linger, unresolved, vibrating in the background of your mind. Because once you truly feel it, you can't unfeel it. And the search for the observer will quietly begin to change the way you see everything. If you try to answer the question, who am I, honestly, without reaching for a name, a memory, or a role, something unsettling happens. The mind pauses. There is a brief gap, like a skipped frame in a video. And then, almost instinctively, it fills the silence with an image, a face, a history, a voice saying, me. Segment 2 begins inside that gap, because that gap is where the truth keeps slipping through. You have never encountered yourself directly, not once. Every time you believe you have, what you actually met was a reflection, a mirror version, a delayed echo. Even now, the sense of being someone feels solid only because it is constantly being reinforced by feedback loops. You see your reflection in glass. You hear your name spoken by others. You remember what you were like yesterday. Each one whispers the same message. This is you. But none of them are the one who is looking. A mirror is honest only in a shallow way. It shows you shape and symmetry, skin and motion, but it cannot show the feel of being behind the eyes. You can stare into your own reflection for a long time and still never meet the one who is staring. And something eerie happens if you do it long enough. The face begins to feel unfamiliar, as if it belongs to someone else. As if the reflection is a mask worn so convincingly that you forgot it was a mask at all. This is not imagination. It is perception doing exactly what it evolved to do. The brain recognizes patterns. Faces are patterns. The reflection is processed like any other object in the world, useful, informative. But the observer remains on this side of the glass, unreachable. The mirror never breaks open to reveal the one who is aware. Memory behaves the same way. When you think of yourself as a child, what appears is an image, a scene, a story. You remember what you looked like, what you felt like, what you believed at the time. But that remembered you is not the one remembering. It is a reconstruction built from fragments, stitched together by the present mind. The observer now is not the observer then, and yet you call them the same person. This continuity feels sacred. It gives life coherence. Without it, existence would feel like a series of unrelated moments. But look closely. Memory does not preserve the self. It manufactures it. Every recollection is edited, filtered, simplified. Neuroscience shows that when you remember something, you are not replaying a recording. You are rebuilding it from scratch. Each time you do, it changes slightly. The past you think you know has already been altered by the act of remembering it. So, which version was real? The mind does not care. It needs only one thing, a stable narrative, a story that says, this happened to me, this is who I am, this is where I'm going. The story becomes the spine of identity, and the observer quietly disappears behind it, like an author who never steps onto the stage. Language deepens the illusion. The word I is powerful. It compresses an entire universe of experience into a single syllable. I think, I feel, I choose. But what does that word actually point to? Every time you say I, you are referencing a concept, not a sensation. You can feel tension. You can feel warmth. You can feel joy. But you cannot feel the I itself. It is inferred, not experienced. This inference is so convincing that questioning it feels like destabilizing gravity. The mind reacts with resistance. It wants certainty. It wants to land somewhere. So it grabs onto the loudest thing available, the inner voice. That voice feels intimate, familiar. It narrates your life from the inside. It comments, judges, anticipates. It feels like the thinker behind thought. But listen carefully. You can hear it. And anything you can hear is not the listener. The voice is just another sound appearing in awareness, a sophisticated one, shaped by culture and memory, but still an appearance. Sometimes it speaks in words, sometimes in images, sometimes in emotional tone. It claims ownership. It says, I am angry, I am afraid, I am in control, but it never explains who is hearing the claim. This realization can feel like standing on unstable ground, because if the voice is not the observer, then what is speaking right now, and who is listening? Psychology offers a partial answer. The brain predicts, evaluates, and narrates in order to maintain coherence. The inner voice is a tool, a model, a storyteller. It helps you navigate social reality. It helps you plan. It helps you survive. But it was never meant to reveal the ultimate truth of who you are. It was meant to keep the organism functioning. So when you turn that tool inward, demanding it explain the observer, it fails. Not because the observer is hidden, but because the tool was never designed for that task. It is like using a ruler to measure color, and yet the failure itself is instructive. Every attempt to find the observer produces another object, a thought about awareness, a fee, This infinite regress is not an accident. It is the structure of self-inquiry itself. The observer cannot be found because it is not located at the end of the chain. It is the chain appearing. But the mind resists this conclusion. It wants something solid. So it asks another question. If the observer can't be seen, maybe it can be defined. Maybe it is the brain, or consciousness, or the soul, or some hidden core. Each definition feels temporarily satisfying, and each one eventually cracks. If you say, "I am my brain," you run into another problem. You can observe brain activity indirectly. You can read about neurons firing, networks synchronizing, chemicals flowing, but you never experience neurons. You experience thoughts and sensations. The brain is a model explaining experience, not the experiencer itself. If you say, "I am consciousness," the word collapses under its own weight. Consciousness becomes another concept floating in awareness. Useful, vague, still not the observer. If you say, "I am the soul," the question returns sharper than before. Where is it? How does it see? Why can it observe thoughts but not be observed? Every answer becomes another mirror. And mirrors do something subtle to the psyche. They create distance. They turn immediacy into image. When you believe you have found yourself, what you have actually found is a representation, a proxy, a stand-in. The observer remains untouched, unreflected. This is why moments of deep silence can feel so strange. When the inner commentary quiets, when the narrative loosens, there is a sense of being without a description. Awareness remains, but there is no label for it, no handle, no reference point, and the mind panics. Because without a mirror, it doesn't know how to recognize itself. Yet, in that panic, there is also relief, a softness, a release from constant self-definition. For a brief moment, you are not someone trying to be something. You are just presence, open and undefined. Children sometimes touch this naturally. Before identity hardens, before the mirror of social feedback fully forms, there is a raw immediacy to experience, a sense of being without explanation. Over time, society hands the child a reflection and says, "This is you." And the child accepts it, because acceptance means belonging. But the cost of belonging is forgetting. Segment 2 is not about rejecting mirrors. Mirrors are useful. Identity is functional. The story of self helps you move through the world. But problems begin when the reflection is mistaken for the source, when the map is confused for the territory, when the observer believes it is only the image it sees. This confusion shapes suffering. When the story self is threatened, you feel fear. When it is praised, you feel pride. When it is ignored, you feel emptiness. All of this happens because the observer has identified with the reflection and forgotten its own invisibility. And invisibility feels like non-existence. But what if invisibility is freedom? What if the observer cannot be seen not because it is absent, but because it is too close? What if it is not behind the eyes, but everywhere experience happens? Not a thing looking out, but the openness in which looking occurs? This question doesn't answer itself yet. It hangs in the air, unresolved. And that unresolved quality is intentional, because certainty would collapse the mystery too soon. The mirror is cracking, but it is not shattered. In the next segment, we will move from mirrors to light itself, to attention, to the strange way focusing creates both clarity and shadow. Because once you begin to see that the self is a reflection, the next question becomes unavoidable. If attention creates the image of me, what happens when attention shifts? And who are you then? Before we go any further, notice where your attention is right now. Not what it's focused on, but the act of focusing itself. Attention feels like a beam, a spotlight sweeping across a dark stage. Wherever it lands, something appears vivid, real, important. Wherever it doesn't, things fade into the background, half-existent, easy to forget. Segment 3 begins here, because this spotlight may be the most powerful illusion generator the mind possesses. You believe you are the one directing attention. You decide what to focus on, what to ignore. But look closer. Attention often moves before you choose. A sound pulls it. A memory hijacks it. A fear grips it. A desire locks it in place. Attention behaves less like a servant and more like a force of nature, obeying hidden currents you rarely see. And wherever attention goes, a sense of self quietly forms around it. When attention is locked onto pain, you become the one who is suffering. When it is absorbed in achievement, you become the one who must succeed. When it is trapped in memory, you become the one who was. When it is projected into the future, you become the one who will be. The self is not constant. It is assembled in real time, shaped by what attention chooses or is compelled to illuminate. Think of attention as light passing through a lens. The lens shapes the image. It magnifies some things, distorts others, leaves much unseen. Your sense of identity is the image formed by this optical system. Change the angle of the light, and the image changes too. This is why your sense of me feels different in different moments. In danger, it contracts, sharp and urgent. In love, it softens, expands, blurs at the edges. In boredom, it feels heavy and restless. In awe, it almost disappears. The observer feels stable only because attention rarely stops moving long enough for you to notice the shifts. But there is a deeper consequence to this spotlight. Every light casts a shadow. Whatever attention highlights becomes me. Whatever it excludes becomes not me. Unwanted thoughts, forbidden desires, buried fears, old grief, silent rage. These don't vanish. They retreat into the dark, where they continue to influence the system without being seen. This is the shadow self, not as a metaphor, but as a direct result of selective awareness. The mind learns early what is acceptable to notice and what is dangerous to feel. Attention is trained, conditioned, redirected away from pain, vulnerability, uncertainty. And the more something is avoided, the more power it gains, like a shape moving just outside the beam of a flashlight. Always present, never fully seen. Psychology has names for this: repression, denial, suppression, but the mechanism is simple. Attention avoids what threatens the story of self. The observer, still invisible, becomes identified with the spotlight and mistakes its narrow field for the whole of reality. This is where suffering quietly takes root. Because what is unseen does not dissolve, it accumulates, it leaks, it appears indirectly, in anxiety with no clear cause, in sudden anger, in self-sabotage, in the feeling that something is wrong even when life looks fine on the surface. The shadow speaks in symptoms because it has been denied the light of direct awareness. And here's the paradox. The more tightly you try to control attention to maintain a stable identity, the more fragmented that identity becomes. Attention is not neutral. Neuroscience shows that what you attend to strengthens neural pathways. Attention is training. It sculpts the brain. What you repeatedly focus on becomes easier to think, easier to feel, easier to be. Over time, attention doesn't just reveal the self, it builds it. So ask yourself, if attention constructs the self, then who were you before attention learned where to go? There is a subtle memory here, not a personal memory, but a bodily one. Moments when attention relaxes its grip, when it opens instead of narrows. In those moments, the sense of being a separate observer softens. There is less effort, less resistance. Experience flows without commentary. The spotlight widens into a glow. This happens in moments of deep absorption, watching waves crash endlessly, listening to music that dissolves thought, being so present in movement or creation that the inner narrator falls silent. Later you say, I lost myself. But what if that loss was not a mistake? What if it was a glimpse? In those moments, awareness does not disappear. Attention does not turn off. It simply stops carving the world into me and not me. And without that division, the observer has nothing to cling to. This is why silence can feel threatening. Silence removes objects for attention to grasp. Without objects, the self has nothing to orbit around. The mind fills the space quickly. Thoughts rush in, distractions multiply, because emptiness feels like erasure. But emptiness is not nothingness, it is openness. Imagine standing in a vast field at night. The darkness is not an object, it cannot be pointed to, but it allows everything else to be seen. Stars, movement, distance. Without darkness, light would have no contrast. Without openness, experience would have nowhere to appear. Attention, when narrowed, forgets this openness. It confuses the beam with the space it moves through. And here is the critical turn. You are not the beam. The beam moves. It flickers. It intensifies and weakens. You can notice it doing all of this, which means awareness is already wider than attention, already prior to it, already free from its compulsions. This does not mean attention is an enemy. It is a tool, a powerful one. But tools are dangerous when mistaken for the hand that holds them. When awareness rests as awareness, without chasing, without selecting, without forcing, the sense of an observer quietly changes. There is still seeing, still hearing, still feeling. But there is less someone doing it. Experience unfolds without a center. This is not a mystical claim. It is an observable fact of experience if you are willing to look without expectation. The difficulty is not seeing it. The difficulty is trusting it, because the identity you've lived inside for years is built from attention habits. To loosen them feels like stepping into uncertainty. Who are you without your usual fixations? Without your familiar worries? Without the constant reference to me? The mind answers with fear. But fear too can be observed. It arises. It tightens the body. It tells stories. And awareness remains untouched. So perhaps the observer was never hidden behind attention. Perhaps it was hidden by attention, by the constant motion of the beam, never resting long enough to reveal the space it moves within. As we move forward, this realization will deepen, because attention does not only shape identity in the present, it reaches backward into memory and forward into imagination, stitching together a timeline that feels continuous and personal. And that timeline may be the most convincing illusion of all. In the next segment, we will step into time itself, into memory, into the unsettling possibility that the self you remember may never have existed the way you think it did, and that the observer has been rewriting the past every time you look back. Time feels solid because memory tells you it is. A past stretches behind you like a road you've already walked, filled with moments that shaped you, decisions that defined you, versions of yourself you believe you once were. Segment 4 begins by gently questioning something you have never doubted, whether that road was ever as real, as stable, as continuous as it feels right now. When you remember an event, notice what actually appears: an image, a sensation, a fragment of dialogue, a mood, all of it happening now. The past does not return. Only a present reconstruction does. And the one who is remembering is not the one who lived the memory. That observer is gone, replaced, updated. Yet, you call them the same me, as if time never touched them. Neuroscience is unsettlingly clear about this. Memory is not a recording pulled from storage. It is an act of creation. Each time you remember, the brain reassembles the event using current beliefs, emotions, and context. Then it stores the updated version as if it were the original. The past you trust has already been edited again and again by the observer who exists only now. So, who is the observer then? You imagine a younger version of yourself watching the world through those same eyes. But that image is a guess, a character written by the present mind. The observer you think you were has been replaced so completely that only traces remain, woven into a story that feels personal and continuous. This continuity is powerful. It convinces you that there is a single witness traveling through time, collecting experiences like souvenirs. But look closer. Experience does not move through time. Time moves through experience. Each moment appears fresh, self-contained, complete. Memory links them together after the fact, stitching them into a narrative that feels seamless. The observer does not travel, it appears. Every moment, awareness opens, sights arise, sounds arise, thoughts arise, then they vanish. The next moment opens the same way. Awareness does not age. It does not carry scars. It does not remember. Memory is something that happens within awareness, not something awareness does. This realization creates a subtle fracture in identity, because if the observer is not continuous across time, then the self you protect so fiercely is more like a character updated frame by frame, not a single enduring entity. Think about how differently you experience yourself now compared to years ago. The fears that once felt overwhelming may now seem distant or even absurd. The desires that once defined you may have lost their grip. If the same observer were truly present all along, why does perspective change so radically? Why does meaning shift? Because the observer is not a person carrying memories forward. It is a space in which memories appear. Physics echoes this in unexpected ways. In relativity, there is no universal now. Time depends on motion, gravity, perspective. Events that seem sequential from one viewpoint may appear simultaneous from another. The idea of a single absolute timeline dissolves, and with it, the idea of a single absolute observer moving along that line. Your experience of time is local, subjective, constructed. The sense of a flowing personal history is a cognitive achievement, not a given feature of reality. This does not make your memories meaningless. It makes them fragile, precious, provisional. They are interpretations, not facts, stories, not footage. And the observer listens to these stories the way a reader listens to a novel, immersed, emotionally invested, yet never literally inside the pages. Trauma reveals this most clearly. A painful memory can feel more real than the present moment. The body reacts as if the past is happening now. Heart rate rises, muscles tense. Awareness fills with images and sensations that override the immediate environment. The observer is not reliving the past. It is experiencing a present construction with devastating intensity. And yet, when attention shifts, when awareness widens, the memory loosens its grip. The past recedes. The observer remains, untouched. This shows something important. The observer is not located in time. Time appears within the observer. If this feels destabilizing, it should. Identity depends on time. Goals depend on time. Regret depends on time. Hope depends on time. To question time is to loosen the entire structure that makes the self feel real. But there is also relief here. If the observer is not bound to the past, then suffering does not have to be permanent. Patterns can end. Stories can soften. Meaning can change, not because the past is erased, but because the observer was never trapped inside it. Notice how often the sense of me intensifies around memory. Guilt pulls attention backward. Anxiety pushes it forward. Rarely does identity feel strongest in the present moment alone. The self thrives in temporal tension, between what was and what might be. When that tension relaxes, something strange happens. The self thins. Awareness becomes more spacious, less defined, more intimate. The observer stops identifying with a timeline and rests as presence. This is why stillness can feel timeless. Minutes pass unnoticed. Hours collapse into a single felt moment. Time, as a psychological construct, dissolves when attention stops narrating change. So, perhaps the observer cannot observe itself because it is not located anywhere, neither in space nor in time. It is not a thing moving through moments. It is the openness in which moments appear and disappear. This does not answer the question of who you are. It deepens it. Because if you are not the story, not the memory, not the timeline, then what remains? As we move forward, the investigation will turn sharper. Because if the observer is not in time and not in the story of self, then what happens when observation itself interferes with reality? When looking changes what is looked at? When awareness collapses possibilities simply by noticing them? In the next segment, we will cross into physics, not as equations, but as a mirror, into measurement, collapse, and the unsettling cost of looking. Because the universe itself may be telling us something crucial about why the observer can never fully turn back on itself without changing everything it touches. The universe behaves differently when it is watched, not metaphorically, literally. Segment 5 begins with this quiet, unsettling fact because it mirrors something deeply personal you have already felt inside your own mind. The act of observation is not passive. It is not innocent. To look is to interfere. To measure is to change. And the deeper you follow this truth into physics, the more it begins to feel like a confession written into reality itself. In the quantum world, particles do not have definite properties until they are measured. An electron is not simply here or there. It exists as a spread of possibilities, a haze of potential states. Only when an observation is made does that haze collapse into a single outcome, one position, one value, one fact. Before the measurement, the universe is undecided. After it, something has been chosen, and something else has been lost. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is the formal structure of modern physics. Observation forces commitment, and the observer is never outside the system. For decades, physicists tried to avoid this implication. They searched for hidden variables, deeper mechanisms that would restore objectivity, something beneath the uncertainty, something that would let the universe exist fully formed, independent of being seen. But the more carefully they looked, the more the same conclusion returned. There is no view from nowhere, no cosmic camera hovering outside reality. The observer is entangled with the observed. Now bring this back inward. When you observe your own thoughts, what happens to them? they change. A thought noticed loses momentum. An emotion examined begins to soften or shift. A fear named starts to dissolve. The mind behaves like a quantum system in this way. Unobserved, it flows chaotically, branching into countless possibilities. Observed, it collapses into something definite, often smaller, more rigid, more controlled. Self-observation narrows the field. This is why intense self-monitoring feels constricting. When you watch yourself too closely, spontaneity disappears. You become stiff, self-conscious, fragmented. The observer tries to pin itself down, and in doing so, reduces the richness of experience. Possibility collapses into performance. So, the question becomes dangerous. If observation collapses systems, what collapses when you observe the observer? Every time you turn awareness back on itself, something tightens. Language rushes in. Concepts appear. You grasp at an idea of awareness, presence, self. And in that grasping, the openness you were trying to notice shrinks into an object. The observer becomes another thing being observed, and the original openness vanishes. This is the cost of looking. Physics calls this the measurement problem. Consciousness calls it confusion. Both point to the same limit. The act of knowing has a price. Your mind wants certainty. It wants to define. It wants to say, this is what I am. But the more tightly you define, the less space remains for being. Just as a quantum system loses possibilities when measured, the self loses depth when over-identified. Consider how different you feel when you are simply immersed in experience versus when you are constantly thinking about yourself having the experience. In the first, there is flow. In the second, there is tension. The difference is not the activity, it is the level of observation applied to the observer, and yet, awareness itself does not create this tension. Identification does. Awareness can notice without collapsing. It can be open without fixing. But the moment awareness is claimed, this awareness is me, the collapse begins. The infinite becomes personal. The vast becomes narrow. The sky is mistaken for a cloud. In quantum experiments, the observer does not need to be human. A measuring device is enough. What matters is interaction, not intention. The universe responds to contact. In the same way, the mind responds to attention. Whatever attention touches becomes shaped by that touch. So when attention touches the idea of me, it shapes it, reinforces it, makes it feel solid, real, important. And the more attention circles that center, the more gravitational pull it gains. This is how ego forms, not as arrogance, but as curvature. Attention bends inward. Experience wraps around a reference point. The observer forgets it was ever open, but physics also offers a quieter insight. Before measurement, there is superposition. Multiple possibilities existing simultaneously. Nothing forced, nothing fixed. This is not chaos. It is richness, potential, freedom. What would it mean to relate to your own awareness the same way? Instead of demanding, who am I exactly? What if you allowed the question to remain unresolved? What if the observer did not need to collapse into an answer to function? What if identity could remain fluid, contextual, provisional? The fear here is loss of control. Without a fixed self, who chooses? Who acts? Who decides? But look at your life. Choices happen. Actions unfold. Words emerge. Long before you narrate them. The sense of authorship appears after the fact, stitched into memory. The observer watches decisions happen, then claims them retroactively. This is not disempowering. It is humbling. The universe does not require a central controller to evolve stars and galaxies. Complex order emerges from interaction, not command. In the same way, your life does not require a fixed inner manager. It requires awareness, responsiveness, openness. The observer's attempt to control itself is like a wave trying to freeze its own shape. The harder it tries, the more unnatural it becomes. This is why moments of surrender feel strangely powerful. When you stop trying to define yourself, defend yourself, manage yourself, something else takes over. Intelligence moves through you without friction. Words come effortlessly. Movements align. Decisions feel clear without being forced. This is not mystical. It is what happens when observation relaxes into participation. But the mind resists this deeply, because control feels safe, collapse feels secure, An identity, even a painful one, feels more stable than openness. So the observer keeps trying to observe itself into certainty, and each attempt shrinks the field just enough to feel real. Segment 5 leaves us here, on the edge of this realization, that the observer cannot fully observe itself without altering itself, and that this alteration may be the root of both identity and suffering. The universe, at its smallest scales, refuses to be seen without consequence, and so do you. The question now sharpens. If the self is shaped by observation, and if observation collapses possibility, then what exactly is the self we experience every day? Is it something real, or is it a user interface, a simplified projection designed to help us survive in a world too complex to perceive directly? In the next segment, we will step into the brain itself, into prediction, simulation, and the unsettling idea that what you call you may be more like a dashboard than a driver. A symbol on a screen, not the system running beneath it. If you look closely at your own experience, you'll notice something quietly disturbing. You never encounter reality directly. You encounter a version of it, assembled, interpreted, filtered. Segment 6 begins with this realization, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. What you see, hear, feel, and even think is not the world itself, but a living simulation constructed inside your nervous system. Your brain is not a window, it is a prediction engine. Every second, it takes incomplete sensory data and fills in the gaps with expectation. Colors are inferred. Depth is guessed. Continuity is assumed. The world feels stable, not because it is delivered to you whole, but because your brain is constantly correcting its own errors fast enough to hide the seams. You are not perceiving reality. You are inhabiting a model of it. And at the center of that model sits something you call me. But what is that me, really? Neuroscience doesn't find a commander when it looks inside the brain. There is no central observer watching a screen. Instead, there are processes, parallel, competing, cooperative. Vision predicts what should be there. Memory predicts what usually happens. Emotion predicts what matters. Action systems prepare movements before you consciously decide, and only afterward does a narrative arise claiming authorship. The self is not the driver. It is the dashboard. It tells you what the system thinks is happening. It gives you a simplified interface, thoughts, feelings, intentions. Clean symbols replacing vast complexity. Useful, efficient, and dangerously convincing. Think about a video game. The character on the screen feels like the agent. You say, I jumped, I turned, I died. But the real activity is elsewhere, in code, processors, invisible systems translating input into output. The character is not the computer, it is a representation. What if your sense of self functions the same way? The feeling of, I am doing this, may be the brain's way of summarizing outcomes, not initiating them. A story layered on top of process is already in motion. This would explain something you've felt, but maybe never named. The way actions sometimes seem to happen before you decide, and decisions seem obvious only after they've been made. You reach for a glass. The hand moves. Then the thought appears. I chose to do that. But experiments show the brain began preparing the movement before the conscious intention arose. The dashboard updated after the engine already turned. So, where is the observer in all this? It's tempting to say the observer is the brain, but the brain is also part of the simulation. A model of itself exists within itself, endlessly recursive. The observer you feel cannot be reduced to neurons firing, because neurons firing are something you only know as a concept appearing in awareness. You never experience your brain directly. You experience images, sensations, thoughts about it. So the observer is not the dashboard, not the code, not the model. And yet, without the model, experience as you know it would not exist. This is where the illusion becomes subtle and profound. The brain builds a self-model because it is useful. It helps predict outcomes. It helps coordinate action. It helps navigate social worlds. A stable me allows other brains to predict you, trust you, respond to you. Identity is not just personal, it's social technology. But usefulness is not truth. The dashboard does not show the entire system. It hides complexity so you can function. And the most important thing it hides may be the fact that there is no single entity in control. This can feel terrifying, because control feels synonymous with existence. If no one is driving, then what am I? But notice something carefully. When you dream, a world appears. Characters act. Events unfold. And within the dream, there is a dream self who believes it is making choices. But when you wake up, you realize the entire scene, including the sense of agency, was generated by a deeper process. Was the dream meaningless because the dream self wasn't real? Or was it vivid precisely because experience doesn't require a central controller? Waking life may not be as different as it feels. The observer you are searching for may not be a pilot inside the system. It may be the open capacity for simulation itself. The space in which the dashboard appears, the field in which predictions light up as experience. This is why the observer can't observe itself as an object, because it is not one more element inside the model. It is the condition that allows the model to appear. Trying to find it as a thing is like trying to find the screen inside the image on the screen, and yet, the illusion persists. The dashboard keeps insisting, I am here, I am central, I am in charge. And because this voice has been narrating your life since childhood, it feels intimate, undeniable. But intimacy does not guarantee accuracy. There are moments when the dashboard glitches, when the interface falters, panic attacks, dissociation, flow states, sudden awe, near-death experiences. In these moments, the sense of being a central self can weaken or vanish entirely, while awareness remains vivid. People often describe these moments with the same language. I was still there, but I wasn't me. That sentence sounds contradictory only because the dashboard is confused. What disappears is not awareness, but the self-model. The symbol flickers. The interface resets. And for a moment, experience unfolds without a reference point. These moments are often followed by fear or by peace. Sometimes both. Because losing the dashboard feels like losing control, but it also feels like being released from a burden you didn't know you were carrying. You have spent your life protecting a character you mistook for the observer. Segment 6 is where the story begins to tilt. Not toward nihilism, not toward erasure, but toward honesty. You are not the dashboard. You are not the narrative. You are not the prediction. And yet, all of these arise within what you are. The observer does not live behind the eyes, inside the skull, steering the system. The observer is not in the simulation. The observer is what makes simulation possible. This reframes the fear. If the self is an interface, then losing it is not death. It is de-identification. The system continues, life continues, experience continues. Only the story of a central controller loosens. But a new question emerges, quiet, unsettling, unavoidable. If the observer is not a thing, not an agent, not a model, then what happens when the model dissolves completely? When the interface drops away? When the illusion of separation finally breaks? Is there freedom there, or nothing at all? In the next segment, we will descend into the most dangerous paradox of this journey, the infinite regress. The watcher watching the watcher watching. The endless hallway of selves that appears when the mind tries to locate itself. And why, at the end of that hallway, there may be no door, only openness. There comes a moment in this inquiry when the mind turns back on itself too sharply, and something strange begins to happen. Segment 7 opens inside that strangeness. You ask, who is aware? And an answer appears. Then you notice that answer, and immediately another question follows. Who noticed that? The mind steps back again and again and again, like a camera pointed at its own live feed, generating an endless tunnel of mirrors. This is the infinite regress, the watcher watching the watcher watching. At first, it feels like progress. Each layer peeled back feels closer to truth. You notice thoughts. Then you notice the noticing of thoughts. Then you notice the noticing of the noticing. Each step feels subtler, more refined, and yet something quietly unsettling emerges. There is no final layer, no ultimate observer waiting at the end of the hallway, just more hallway. The mind panics here. It was searching for ground, for a core, for something that could finally say, this is it, this is me. But instead, it finds endless recursion, a system that can reference itself indefinitely without ever landing on a solid point. This is not a mistake, it is a clue. In logic and mathematics, self-reference creates paradox. A sentence that refers to itself cannot be resolved cleanly. This statement is false. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. The system loops. There is no stable answer. Consciousness behaves the same way when it tries to objectify itself. The observer cannot be pinned down without generating another observer to do the pinning. So, the question shifts, not where is the observer, but why does the mind insist there must be one? The need for a central witness is psychological. It gives orientation, safety, a sense of ownership. Without it, experience feels unanchored. But unanchored does not mean unreal. It means free-floating. Watch what happens when you stop climbing the ladder of observers, when you stop asking who is watching, when you stop trying to stand outside experience. There is still awareness, still clarity, still presence, but no one standing behind it, claiming it. This is the point most inquiries quietly avoid, because it feels like a loss. The mind equates absence of a center with disappearance. But look carefully. Nothing disappears. Sounds continue. Sensations continue. Thoughts arise and fade. Life remains vivid. What vanishes is the idea that there is a watcher separate from what is watched. The infinite regress only exists as long as you keep trying to turn awareness into an object. The moment you stop, the hallway collapses. Not into darkness, but into immediacy. This is deeply counterintuitive. You were taught that understanding comes from analysis, from stepping back, from observing the observer. But here, stepping back creates illusion. Understanding comes not from distance, but from intimacy. Consider this. When you see a color, do you need a second eye inside your head to see that you are seeing it? When you feel warmth, do you need to confirm that you are feeling? Experience does not require a supervisor. It is self-luminous. It knows itself by being itself. The idea that there must be an observer behind experience is an assumption, not an observation. The infinite regress exposes this assumption by exhausting it. It shows you that looking for the observer as a thing will never end, because the observer is not a thing. It is not located in the chain. It is the chain appearing. And here, a subtle shift becomes possible. Instead of asking, who is aware? Awareness rests as awareness. No reference point, no hierarchy, no watcher watching. Just openness in which experience unfolds. This is not blankness, it is fullness without ownership. The mind struggles with this because ownership is how it maintains identity. Without ownership, who is responsible? Who chooses? Who lives this life? But responsibility, choice, and life continue perfectly well without a central narrator. In fact, they often function more smoothly. Think about breathing. It happens without a doer. You can interfere, but you don't need to manage it. The same is true for much of your thinking, feeling, acting. The sense of control is layered on afterward, like a caption added to a photograph. When that caption drops away, the image remains. This realization can feel like standing at the edge of a vast openness with no railings. Some experience it as liberation, others as terror, often both. Because the ego, the self-model, was built to protect itself from exactly this recognition. It says, if I am not watching, I will disappear. But it was never watching, it was narrating. The observer you fear losing was never there to begin with. What remains is not nothing. What remains is the capacity for experience itself. Silent, unclaimed, unlocated. And because it is not a thing, it cannot be threatened. This is why attempts to grasp awareness always fail. You cannot hold space. You cannot trap openness. The moment you try, you reduce it to an object and lose what you were trying to see. The infinite regress is the mind's final defense. It keeps you searching forever, so you never have to stop and notice what is already here. Segment 7 ends with this quiet turning point. Not an answer, but a release from the need for one. The watcher does not need to be found. It needs to be stopped. But this does not mean the journey is over. Because once the sense of a central observer loosens, something deeply human comes into focus. Relationship. Other minds. Other lives. Other eyes looking back at you, never fully seeing you, just as you never fully see them. And this is where the question becomes painfully intimate. If no one can see the observer, not even yourself, what does it mean to be seen by another? What does love mean in a universe where every self is a partial illusion? In the next segment, we will step into this emotional core, into loneliness, connection, and the quiet terror of never being fully known. And why that terror might be pointing towards something profoundly freeing. There is a moment in every human life when the question stops being philosophical and becomes painfully personal. Segment 8 begins there, in the quiet space between you and another person, in the feeling that no matter how close you get, something essential remains unseen. You can share memories, bodies, fears, promises, but the one who is aware, the one listening behind your eyes, is never fully revealed. This is not a failure of intimacy. It is its hidden structure. Every relationship is built between interfaces, two dashboards facing each other, exchanging symbols, words, expressions, gestures. You learn how another person reacts, what they love, what they fear, what hurts them. You feel deeply connected, and yet, you never step inside their awareness. You never see the world exactly as they see it. You infer, you imagine, you hope. They do the same with you. This gap is subtle, but it shapes everything. It is why even the most loving relationships contain misunderstanding. Why even perfect communication still leaves a residue of loneliness. Why you can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. The observer cannot be observed by anyone. When someone looks at you, they see your face, hear your voice, interpret your actions. They do not see the seeing. They do not feel the raw presence you feel when you are alone with yourself. And you cannot show it to them, no matter how hard you try. Language reduces it. Emotion translates it. Art gestures toward it. But the core remains private. This is the quiet tragedy of being human. You want to be known, not as a role, not as a personality, but as the one who is here, experiencing. And yet, the structure of consciousness itself makes that impossible. The observer is not an object that can be exchanged or shared. It is not transferable. It does not travel. So what do we do with this impossibility? Some people armor themselves. They build strong identities, clear labels, polished images. If I can't be seen fully, at least I can be seen clearly. Others dissolve themselves in others, hoping closeness will erase the gap. Neither works. The gap remains because it is not created by distance. It is created by the nature of awareness, and yet, love still matters. This is the paradox. If the deepest part of you cannot be seen, why does being seen feel so important? Why does recognition heal? Why does neglect wound? Because while awareness itself cannot be observed, its expressions can. When someone listens without trying to fix you, when they sit with your pain without reducing it, when they allow your experience to be what it is, something profound happens. The dashboard feels safe enough to relax. The story loosens. And in that relaxation, the observer rests more openly as itself. You are not being seen as an object. You are being allowed. This is why presence feels like love. Not attention as focus, but attention as openness. The kind that does not collapse you into an image. The kind that does not demand explanation. Children sense this instinctively. They don't want to be analyzed. They want to be held in awareness without judgment. Over time, that sensitivity dulls, replaced by performance and expectation. But the need never disappears. The tragedy is not that we cannot fully see each other. The tragedy is that we forget this is true for everyone. Every person you meet is an observer you will never touch. A field of awareness you can only infer from behavior and words. Behind every face is an unobservable center, just as mysterious and unreachable as your own. When you forget this, people become objects, roles, obstacles, resources. When you remember it, something softens. Compassion deepens when you realize that no one is fully known, not even to themselves. Loneliness, then, takes on a new meaning. It is not proof of separation. It is proof of depth. You feel alone not because you are disconnected, but because what you are cannot be objectified or shared. The observer cannot step out to meet another observer in the way two bodies can meet. And yet, something extraordinary happens in moments of genuine connection. The gap does not close, but it becomes less painful. Because you stop trying to cross it. You sit beside it. Together. Two mysteries acknowledging each other without trying to solve each other. This is what love looks like beneath the stories. Not fusion, not completion, but mutual recognition of irreducible unknowability. You don't know me. I don't know you. And still, we are here, responding, caring, witnessing as best we can. This realization changes how you listen, how you speak, how you forgive. You stop demanding to be perfectly understood. You stop demanding others explain themselves fully. You allow opacity, silence, complexity. You begin to sense that being unseen is not a flaw. It is the price of being infinite. The observer's invisibility is not a curse. It is what makes depth possible. If you could be fully seen, fully captured, fully defined, you would be finite, completed, closed. But because you cannot be seen, you remain open, capable of growth, surprise, change. The same is true for everyone you love. Segment 8 leaves us with this quiet shift. Intimacy is not about eliminating mystery. It is about learning to live gently with it, to stop demanding the impossible, to let connection happen without collapse. And this prepares us for the final turn of the journey. Because if the observer cannot be seen, and if this invisibility is not a failure but a feature, then the question changes again. What happens when the self finally stops trying to be seen at all, when the need for recognition dissolves, when the dashboard drops away and only awareness remains? In the next segment, we will approach the edge experiences where this sometimes happens. Meditation, awe, ego dissolution, moments where the mask slips and the observer no longer feels separate from what is observed. Not as promises of enlightenment, but as cracks in the frame. There are moments, rare, unplanned, often unsettling, when the structure you have been living inside quietly fails. Segment 9 begins in those moments. Not in theory, not in belief, but in experience. Moments when the sense of being a separate self loosens its grip, and something vast presses in from the edges of perception. People describe these moments in many ways. A sudden stillness during meditation, a wave of awe while staring at the night sky, the shock of beauty that stops thought mid-sentence, a panic attack that strips identity down to raw sensation, a brush with death where the story of me falls silent, different doors, the same room. What disappears in these moments is not awareness, it is ownership. Thoughts may slow or vanish entirely, and the inner narrator falls quiet. The familiar center, the feeling that I am in here, looking out, begins to dissolve, and yet, experience does not end. In fact, it often becomes sharper. Colors feel brighter, sounds feel closer, sensations feel immediate, unfiltered, alive. People often say, I disappeared. But what they mean is something more precise. The self-model disappeared, the interface flickered, the mask slipped. What remains is awareness without a name. This is deeply unsettling to the ego, because the ego's job is to maintain continuity, control, and identity. It warns you that without it, you will vanish, lose meaning, lose direction. And yet, in these edge experiences, meaning often intensifies. Life feels fuller, not emptier. There is fear, yes, but also relief. A sense of coming home to something older than personality. Meditation offers a controlled way into this territory. When attention rests without chasing thought, when awareness watches without grasping, the self slowly thins. At first, this feels like loss. The mind scrambles to reassert control. Thoughts multiply. Discomfort rises. But if you stay, something shifts. The effort drops. The watcher stops watching. And experience continues without a center. This is not mystical. It is mechanical. When the system stops narrating itself, the narration ends. The screen remains. The image continues. All works differently, but leads to the same place. When you stand before something vast, the ocean, a mountain range, the stars, the self feels small, not diminished, but irrelevant. The universe does not acknowledge your story. And in that indifference, there is freedom. You stop performing. You stop defending. You simply are. Even fear can crack the frame. In moments of extreme panic, the mind loses its ability to maintain a coherent identity. Thoughts fragment. Time distorts. The sense of me breaks apart. What remains is raw awareness flooded with sensation, terrifying, and yet unmistakably alive. These experiences are often misunderstood. Some chase them, hoping to escape suffering. Others avoid them, afraid of losing control. But both miss the point. These moments are not about escape or transcendence. They are about revelation. They reveal that the observer does not depend on the self. Awareness does not need an identity to function. It does not need a narrative to exist. It does not need recognition to be real. It was never fragile. Only the self-model was. This realization changes how you understand death. Because what you fear losing may not be what you think. The story will end. The interface will shut down. Memory, personality, history, all of that will dissolve. But the fear that clings to these things arises from identification, not from awareness itself. No one knows what happens beyond the edge of life. But these moments offer a hint. The terror is tied to the idea of being someone. When that idea loosens, what remains is not terror, but openness. This does not mean you should seek to erase yourself. The self is functional, necessary, beautiful in its own way. It allows love, creativity, responsibility, play. The problem was never the self. The problem was mistaking it for the observer. When the mask slips, you don't lose humanity. You gain perspective. You see the self as a tool, not a prison. A costume, not your skin. And something else happens too. Compassion deepens, because when you see how fragile and constructed your own identity is, you begin to sense the same fragility in others. The anger softens, the judgments loosen. You recognize that everyone is protecting a story they believe is themselves. Behind every conflict is a threatened self-model. Behind every defense is fear of disappearance. And behind every fear is awareness, untouched. Segment 9 brings us to the edge, but it does not ask you to jump. It asks you to look. To recognize that the moments when you feel most alive are often the moments when you are least present. That peace does not come from perfect control, but from release. That meaning does not require a central owner. The observer has never been a person inside your head. It has always been the space in which personhood appears. So, we arrive at the final question, not as a climax, but as a quiet resolution. If the observer cannot observe itself, and if every attempt to define it collapses it into a smaller shape, then what is left to do? In the final segment, we will stop chasing the observer altogether. We will let the question dissolve, and we will explore what it means to live, not as a self trying to find itself, but as the openness that has been here all along, witnessing every moment without needing to be seen. There is a quiet relief that arrives when the search finally exhausts itself. Segment 10 begins not with an answer, but with a release. The question that has followed you through every segment, who is the observer, slowly loses its urgency, not because it has been solved, but because you begin to sense that it was never meant to be answered in the way the mind demanded. The observer cannot observe itself for the same reason an eye cannot see its own seeing. Not because something is missing, but because nothing is wrong. The problem was never blindness. The problem was direction. You kept turning awareness into an object, when awareness was always the space in which objects appeared. Think of the sky again. Clouds drift through it, storms tear across it. Night falls, day returns. The sky never asks what it is. It does not try to see itself. It does not panic when clouds gather or celebrate when they leave. It simply allows. And because it allows, everything else can happen. Your awareness is like that. You have spent your life identifying with the clouds, thoughts, emotions, memories, identities, because they move, they speak, they demand attention. They feel personal. They feel alive. And the sky feels empty by comparison. So, the mind assumed the sky must be nothing. But emptiness was never absence. It was openness. The observer you were trying to find was never hiding behind experience. It was never inside your head, steering the system. It was never a ghost watching a machine. It was the condition that allowed any experience to arise at all. Closer than breath. More intimate than thought. So close you overlooked it entirely. This is why the search felt endless. You were looking for yourself in the wrong place. You were looking for the sky among the clouds. When this is seen, not intellectually, but quietly, in experience, something softens. The pressure to define yourself eases. The need to be certain relaxes. You still think. You still feel. You still live a human life with its joys and wounds. But there is less gripping, less fear around identity, less urgency to defend a story. You stop asking, who am I really? And start living as the openness in which the question appears. This does not make you detached or cold. It makes you more available. When you are no longer obsessed with preserving a self-image, you listen more deeply. You love with less demand. You respond instead of react. You feel pain without turning it into a personal failure. You feel joy without fearing its loss. Life becomes less about holding on and more about participation. The paradox is this. The moment you stop trying to see the observer, you begin to live from it, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a felt sense of spaciousness that includes everything without clinging to anything. You are still someone. You still have a name, a history, a body, a role in the world. But you are no longer trapped inside those things. They become expressions, not definitions, waves, not the ocean. And when suffering arises, and it will, you no longer experience it as proof that something is wrong with you. You experience it as weather passing through awareness. Pain still hurts. Loss still aches. But the suffering does not harden into identity. It does not become me. This is the freedom that was hidden in plain sight. Not the freedom of escaping the self, but the freedom of not mistaking it for what you are. You may never see your true self, and that is not a tragedy. It is the most intimate truth of consciousness. The observer cannot observe itself because it is not an object in the world. It is the openness that allows a world to appear. Once you stop chasing it, something extraordinary happens. The search ends. The tension dissolves. And life, ordinary, fragile, fleeting, becomes enough. You don't need to be seen fully. You don't need to define yourself perfectly. You don't need to arrive at a final answer. You are already what you were looking for, not as a thing to be found, but as the space in which finding happens. And in that recognition, quiet and unremarkable, there is peace. This is where the journey ends, not with a conclusion, but with a resting. The observer does not step forward, it remains unseen. And yet, it has been here through every word, every thought, every moment of this documentary, listening, allowing, witnessing, exactly as it always has.